The rain hammered against the sagging roof of Elderwood Cottage as Marcus Thorne pushed open the creaking door for the first time. His fellow Royal Guards had laughed until tears streamed down their faces when they learned this was his inheritance, a pile of rotting wood and broken dreams on the kingdom's forgotten outskirts. "Congratulations on your mansion, pauper," they'd sneered. But Marcus carried a secret that would have silenced their mockery instantly. Hidden in his grandmother's final letter was a cryptic map, sketched in faded ink, pointing to something extraordinary beneath the cottage's foundation. As captain of the Royal Treasury Guard for 15 years, Marcus knew the difference between fool's gold and the real thing. What his grandmother had discovered during her decades of quiet digging would either make him the richest man in the kingdom or get him killed. The cottage groaned ominously as he stepped inside, floorboards sagging under his weight. Somewhere beneath his feet lay a fortune that powerful people had killed for before. The question wasn't whether the treasure existed, it was whether Marcus would live long enough to claim it. The musty air hit him like a physical blow, thick with decades of neglect and something else, something that made his trained instincts prickle with unease. Marcus pulled his weathered cloak tighter against the chill seeping through broken window panes. Water dripped steadily into rusted buckets positioned throughout the single room, creating an irregular percussion that echoed off bare walls. His grandmother's sparse belongings remained exactly as she'd left them 6 months ago. A threadbare armchair faced the cold fireplace, its stuffing bleeding through countless tears. Shelves lined one wall, holding mason jars filled with preserved vegetables and mysterious herbal concoctions that probably predated his birth. The whole place spoke of grinding poverty, which made the letter's contents even more extraordinary. Marcus reached into his leather satchel and withdrew the yellowed parchment, its edges soft from his countless readings. His grandmother's spidery handwriting covered both sides, but it was the crude map on the back that made his pulse quicken. She'd drawn the cottage's outline with surprising accuracy, marking specific distances from walls and noting landmarks that only someone intimately familiar with the property would know. 17 paces from the eastern wall, he murmured, reading her instructions aloud. 3 paces south from the hearthstone. Look for the loose board marked with father's initials. Marcus had never met his great-grandfather, but his grandmother had spoken of him in whispers, a man who'd worked the kingdom's mines before they were officially discovered, who'd disappeared one winter night and never returned. According to family legend, he'd been prospecting in forbidden territories, following veins of precious metals that belonged to the crown. The floorboards protested with every step as Marcus counted off paces. 17 east brought him to within arm's reach of the far wall, where rain had rotted the wood black. 3 south from the fireplace put him directly in the center of what once might have been a dining area. He knelt and began examining each board, running his fingers along the grain, searching for carved initials. Thunder crashed overhead, and Marcus wondered if the roof would hold. The storm provided perfect cover for his activities, but it also meant he couldn't see anyone approaching the cottage. His years guarding the royal treasury had taught him that treasure hunters were often followed by treasure thieves. On the 7th board, his fingers found them, 2 letters carved so faintly he almost missed them in the dim light. Et Elias Thorne, his great-grandfather's name. Marcus pulled his dagger from his belt and worked its point along the board's edges. The wood was softer than it should be, deliberately weakened to provide easy access. The board lifted away with surprising ease, revealing a space that definitely hadn't been part of the original construction. His grandmother had been busy during her final years. The gap showed rough-hewn wooden steps descending into darkness that his torch couldn't penetrate. A folded paper rested on the first step. Marcus recognized his grandmother's handwriting immediately. "My dear Marcus," it read, "what you're about to see has been our family's burden for 3 generations. Your great-grandfather didn't disappear. He was murdered for what he found. I've spent 40 years expanding his work, following the vein he died protecting. The crown thinks their mines hold the kingdom's only precious metals, but they're wrong. What lies beneath our land makes their treasuries look like children's coin purses. But remember this above all, Trust no one. Others know pieces of our secret, and they've killed before to protect it. The royal family, the mining guilds, even some of your fellow guards have been watching our family for decades. Take only what you need to survive, and never let them know how much remains. Your loving grandmother, Elena. Marcus folded the letter carefully and tucked it away. The wooden steps disappeared into absolute darkness below, and somewhere in that blackness waited either his salvation or his doom. Behind him the storm raged with increasing fury, but ahead lay secrets that had already cost 2 lives. He lit his torch and began his descent into the earth. The cottage looked even worse in daylight. Marcus stood at the rusted gate, keys heavy in his palm, wondering if the other guards had been right after all. The thatched roof sagged like an old woman's back, and ivy had claimed most of the stone walls. What had once been a garden was now a battlefield where weeds had declared victory. But it was his now. The lawyer had been clear about that much. Marcus pushed through the gate, wincing as it shrieked on corroded hinges. The sound echoed across the empty moor, disturbing a crow that had been eyeing him from the chimney. His grandmother had lived here alone for 30 years after his grandfather's death, refusing all offers to move somewhere more suitable, more modern, more civilized, as his mother had put it. The front door stuck, swollen from decades of highland rain. Marcus threw his shoulder against it, and it surrendered with a groan that seemed to come from the cottage's very bones. The smell hit him immediately, dust and damp and something else, something that spoke of secrets long buried. Sunlight streamed through grimy windows, illuminating motes of dust that danced like tiny spirits. The furniture was sparse and ancient, each piece looking as though it might crumble at a touch. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth cold and black. On the mantel sat a collection of photographs in tarnished silver frames. His grandmother as a young woman, radiant in a wedding dress, his grandfather in military uniform, himself as a boy, gap-toothed and grinning. Marcus picked up that last photograph, remembering the summer he'd spent here when he was 8. His grandmother had told him stories then, wild tales of hidden gold and ancient secrets, of men who came in the night, asking questions about things that were none of their concern. He'd thought them fairy tales, the imaginings of an old woman growing eccentric in her isolation. The floorboards creaked ominously under his feet as he explored. In the kitchen, copper pots hung from hooks like sleeping bats. The bedroom was tiny, dominated by an iron bed frame that might have been forged in the last century. Everything was exactly as his grandmother had left it, as though she'd simply stepped out for a walk and might return at any moment. It was in the parlor that Marcus noticed the loose floorboard. He might have missed it entirely if his boot hadn't caught on the edge, nearly sending him sprawling. The board was warped, pulling away from its neighbors like a broken tooth. On impulse, he knelt and worked his fingers under the edge. The board came up easier than it should have, revealing a gap in the joists below. Marcus peered into the darkness, then pulled out his phone and activated the flashlight. The beam revealed something that made his breath catch. A metal strongbox, black with age, nestled in the space between the floor and the foundation. His hands trembled as he lifted it out. The box was heavier than expected, and when he shook it gently, something shifted inside with a sound like whispers. The lock was old but solid, and after 20 minutes of searching, Marcus found the key taped to the underside of a kitchen drawer, exactly where his 8-year-old imagination might have placed it. Inside the box, wrapped in oiled cloth, were documents. Land deeds, survey maps, correspondence in his grandfather's careful handwriting, and beneath those, something that made Marcus's world tilt sideways. Geological survey reports dating back 60 years, marked with official seals and covered in technical language that meant nothing to him. Except for the summary on the last page, written in his grandfather's hand, confirmed. Largest vein discovered to date. Estimated value exceeds all previous calculations. The final item in the box was a letter addressed to him personally, in his grandmother's spidery script. His name on the envelope in ink faded to brown, as though she'd written it years ago and simply waited. My dear Marcus, it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone and the cottage is yours. I pray you're wise enough to understand what I'm about to tell you, and clever enough to keep it secret until you decide what to do. Your grandfather found something here, something valuable beyond imagination. We never told anyone, not even your mother. Too dangerous," he said, and he was right. "There are maps in this box, surveys, proof of what lies beneath our feet. The cottage isn't worthless, my boy. It's sitting on a fortune. But remember, some secrets are worth killing for, and there are those who would do anything to possess what we've protected all these years. Trust no one. And whatever you do, don't let them know you've found this until you're ready to act." Marcus looked up from the letter, suddenly aware of how isolated the cottage was, how vulnerable he felt in the gathering dusk. The wind had picked up, rattling the windows like bony fingers seeking entry. He was no longer the inheritor of a worthless hovel. He was the keeper of something that men might kill for. Marcus stared at the wooden chest until his eyes burned, afraid that blinking might make it vanish like some cruel hallucination. The rotting floorboard lay splintered beside the hole, releasing decades of musty air that carried hints of old leather and something metallic. His grandmother's cottage groaned around him, as if the building itself was exhaling secrets it had held too long. With trembling fingers, he reached down and lifted the heavy chest from its hiding place. The wood was dark with age, but surprisingly solid, bound with iron straps that had somehow resisted rust. A simple brass lock hung from the clasp, green with patina but intact. Marcus set it on the kitchen table, which creaked ominously under the weight. The key was obvious once he looked for it, hanging on a small nail driven into the wall beside the fireplace, disguised among his grandmother's collection of old kitchen utensils. She had always been clever that way, hiding things in plain sight. As a child, he'd found candy stashed inside empty flour tins and coins tucked behind loose bricks. But this was different. This was deliberate. The lock clicked open with surprising ease. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth that had preserved them perfectly, were bundles upon bundles of old currency. Not the crisp bills he was used to seeing, but older notes, some dating back decades. Beneath the money, his fingers found something harder, small canvas bags that clinked softly when he lifted them. Gold coins spilled into his palm, their surfaces gleaming despite their age. But it was the leather portfolio at the bottom that made his breath catch. Inside were documents, deeds, and what appeared to be stock certificates. His grandmother's spidery handwriting covered several pages of notes detailing investments made over decades, properties purchased under assumed names, and accounts in banks he'd never heard of. Marcus sank into his grandmother's old chair, the numbers swimming before his eyes as he tried to process what he was seeing. The woman who had raised him on stories of pinching pennies and making do with less had somehow accumulated a fortune. The cottage wasn't just a sentimental inheritance, it was a facade covering wealth beyond his wildest imagination. A car door slammed outside. Marcus's head snapped up, his guard training kicking in instantly. Through the grimy window, he saw Sergeant Hendricks climbing out of his personal vehicle, followed by Davies and 2 other guards from his unit. They were early. He'd told them he needed the weekend to clean the place out. "Shit!" he whispered, frantically shoving documents back into the portfolio. The money and coins followed, but his hands were shaking so badly he dropped several bills. They fluttered to the floor like golden leaves as boots crunched on the gravel outside. The chest barely fit back into the hole beneath the floorboards. Marcus grabbed the broken board and tried to position it over the opening, but it was obviously damaged now. Anyone who looked closely would see the splintered wood, would wonder what had happened. "Marco!" Davies's voice carried through the thin walls. "You in there, you lucky bastard?" "Coming!" Marcus called back, his voice cracking slightly. He kicked the loose floorboard pieces under the kitchen table and tried to arrange his face into something resembling normalcy. The front door opened without ceremony. The lock had been broken for years, and his fellow guards trooped in like they owned the place. Hendrik surveyed the interior with barely disguised disgust, while Davies immediately began poking through the few remaining possessions Marcus hadn't sorted yet. "Jesus, Marco, this place is worse than I remembered," Hendrik said, his polished boots avoiding the more questionable stains on the floor. "You sure you don't just want to torch it and claim the insurance?" "Assuming there is any insurance," Davies added, picking up a chipped teacup and examining it with mock interest. "Your gran strike you as the type to keep up with payments on this dump?" Marcus forced a laugh. She was full of surprises. "I'm still going through everything. Find anything interesting?" This came from Peters, the newest member of their unit, whose eyes were already cataloguing everything in the room with the calculating gaze of someone always looking for an angle. "Just old papers and knickknacks," Marcus replied, hoping his voice sounded steadier than it felt. "Nothing valuable." But Peters wasn't listening anymore. He was staring at the floor beside the kitchen table, where a gleam of gold caught the afternoon light streaming through the window. Marcus followed his gaze and felt his stomach drop. One of the coins had rolled under the table's edge, visible to anyone who bothered to look. "Well, well," Peters said slowly, crouching down. "What do we have here?" Time seemed to freeze as Peters reached for the coin. Marcus's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm before he remembered he wasn't wearing it. These were his friends, his brothers in arms. But the predatory gleam in Peters's eyes as his fingers closed around the gold made Marcus question everything he thought he knew about loyalty. Marcus hadn't slept in 3 days. Every creak of the cottage, every rustle outside the windows, sent his hand instinctively to his sword hilt. The treasure remained hidden beneath the loose floorboard, but its presence seemed to radiate through the walls like a fever. He'd counted the coins 17 times, each count confirming what his mind struggled to accept. He was sitting on a fortune that could buy a small kingdom. The morning shift at the garrison proved torturous. Captain Harwick's eyes followed him with newfound intensity, and Marcus caught whispered conversations that died the moment he approached. Word had somehow leaked about his inheritance, though thankfully not about what he'd found beneath those rotting boards. "Still playing Lord of the Manor, Thorn?" Garrett's voice cut through the armory as Marcus cleaned his sword. "Heard you've been spending quite a bit of time at that rat-infested hovel." Marcus kept his movements steady, running the whetstone along his blade's edge. "Just clearing out grandmother's things. Takes time." "Funny thing," Garrett continued, moving closer. "Old Willem the merchant mentioned seeing you carrying some heavy sacks out there. Building supplies, was it?" The lie came easily. "Rotted floor needed patching. Nearly fell through it my first night." Something flickered in Garrett's expression. Interest, calculation. Marcus cursed himself silently. He'd said too much, painted too clear a picture. A man didn't reinforce floors in a cottage he planned to abandon. "Of course," Garrett smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Always were the practical one, weren't you? Tell me, what's your grandmother's place really worth? Thinking of buying some land myself." Before Marcus could respond, a commotion erupted in the courtyard. Shouts echoed off the stone walls, and both men rushed outside to find a crowd gathered around a horse and rider. The messenger bore the royal seal, his mount lathered with sweat from hard riding. Captain Harwick emerged from the main hall, breaking the seal with practiced efficiency. His face darkened as he read, and when he looked up, his gaze found Marcus immediately. "3 of you with me, now." Harwick's voice carried the weight of bad news. "Garrett, Thorn, Davies, we ride in 10 minutes." The captain said nothing during their hurried preparations, but Marcus caught fragments of whispered conversations among the other guards. Bandits, murder, missing caravan. The words sent ice through his veins, though he couldn't say why. They rode hard for 2 hours before reaching the scene. A merchant's wagon sat overturned on the forest road, its contents scattered like broken dreams across the muddy ground. 2 bodies lay nearby, and Marcus recognized one immediately. Willem, the same merchant Garrett had mentioned just hours before. "Professional work," Captain Harwick observed, crouching beside the corpses. "Single blade thrust to each heart. Quick, clean, efficient." Garrett dismounted and began examining the scattered goods. Doesn't look like robbery. Plenty of value left behind, silks, spices, even some silver. He paused, lifting a torn leather satchel, though it's clear they were searching for something specific. Marcus felt the world tilt slightly. Willem had seen him at the cottage, mentioned it to others. Had the old merchant suspected something, investigated further? The timing couldn't be coincidental. Any idea what they might have been carrying? Davies asked, his young voice betraying nervousness at his first murder scene. Captain Harwick stood, brushing dirt from his hands. Willem dealt in information as much as goods. Always had his ear to the ground about opportunities. His eyes found Marcus again. Spoke to him just yesterday, actually. Mentioned some interesting rumors about unexpected inheritances. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He forced his expression to remain neutral, but sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool afternoon air. "Lot of that going around lately," Garrett commented casually. "People coming into unexpected good fortune. Makes others curious, doesn't it?" They spent another hour examining the scene, but found little else. The killers had been thorough, professional. As they prepared to return, Captain Harwick pulled Marcus aside. "Thorne, I want extra patrols around the outer settlements tonight. Whoever did this might not be finished." He paused, studying Marcus's face. "Including that cottage of yours. Isolated places make tempting targets." The ride back to the garrison passed in tense silence, but Marcus felt eyes on him constantly. By the time they reached the gates, his nerves were stretched to breaking. He needed to move the treasure, find somewhere safer to hide it. But where? And how could he transport that much wealth without being noticed? As the sun set behind the castle walls, Marcus made his decision. Tonight, under cover of darkness, he would return to the cottage. Whether to move the treasure or simply to verify it was still safe, he couldn't say. But sitting idle while danger circled closer was no longer an option. The game had begun, and Marcus was no longer sure who was hunter and who was prey. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cottage yard as Marcus knelt beside the gaping hole in his kitchen floor. Sleep had eluded him entirely, his mind racing between euphoria and terror. $12 million in gold coins lay scattered around him like fallen stars, each piece catching the light and throwing it back in brilliant flashes. He'd spent the night cataloguing the treasure, his hands trembling as he counted stack after stack of pristine gold pieces. Some bore markings he didn't recognize, foreign scripts and symbols that suggested origins far beyond the borders of his small kingdom. Others displayed the familiar crest of the old monarchy, coins that should have been melted down decades ago when the new regime took power. The implications made his stomach churn. This wasn't just valuable, it was historically significant, politically dangerous, the kind of discovery that could rewrite history books or get a person disappeared in the middle of the night. A sharp knock at the front door shattered his concentration. Marcus scrambled to his feet, kicking a loose board over the nearest pile of coins. His heart hammered against his ribs as he approached the door, wiping gold dust from his palms onto his pants. "Marcus, you in there, brother?" The voice belonged to Captain Holloway, his commanding officer. "You missed morning formation." Cursing under his breath, Marcus realized he'd completely lost track of time. He cracked the door open, keeping his body positioned to block any view of the interior. "Captain, sorry, I'm not feeling well. Stomach bug." Holloway's weathered face creased with concern. The man had been like a father to Marcus since he joined the Guard 5 years ago, taking him under his wing when other officers saw only another peasant trying to rise above his station. "You look terrible, son. When's the last time you ate?" "Yesterday, I think." It wasn't entirely a lie. Marcus couldn't remember his last meal. "Listen, I know the other guards have been giving you grief about this place. Don't let them get to you." Holloway glanced past Marcus toward the cottage interior. "Inheritance is a blessing, even when it comes with complications. Your grandmother was a good woman." "Thank you, sir. I just need another day to sort through her things." Holloway nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "Take the time you need. But Marcus..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. If you discover anything unusual while you're cleaning up, anything that might be historically relevant, you know the protocols. The words hit Marcus like ice water. Protocols. Everything of historical value belonged to the crown, every artifact, every document, every piece of gold bearing the royal seal. He managed a weak smile. Of course, Captain, nothing here but old furniture and cobwebs. After Holloway left, Marcus dead-bolted the door and slumped against it. The captain's words echoed in his mind. Did he know something? Was this a warning, or just routine procedure? He returned to the kitchen and stared at the fortune spread before him. Keeping it meant betraying everything he'd sworn to uphold as a Royal Guard. Reporting it meant losing the one chance he'd ever have to escape a life of servitude and mockery. The sound of footsteps outside the cottage sent him diving for cover behind the overturned table. Through the grimy window, he watched two figures approach, guards from his unit. He recognized their swagger before he could make out their faces. Garrett and Thorne, the worst of his tormentors. Place looks even more pathetic in daylight, Garrett's voice carried clearly through the thin walls. Can't believe he's actually planning to live here. Should put it out of its misery, Thorne replied. Do everyone a favor and burn it down. They circled the cottage like wolves, peering through windows and testing the stability of the front porch. Marcus held his breath as they passed near the kitchen window, praying they wouldn't notice the displaced floorboards. What do you think the old woman was hiding in here? Garrett asked, pressing his face against the glass. Everyone knows she was strange, never talked to anyone, never came to town. Probably nothing but old letters and pressed flowers, Thorne said dismissively. Though I heard she used to work at the palace back before the revolution. Kitchen staff. Kitchen staff. Marcus frowned. His grandmother had never mentioned working at the palace. She'd always claimed to be a seamstress, taking in mending from neighboring farms. But if she had palace connections... The guards moved on, their voices fading as they headed back toward town. Marcus waited several more minutes before emerging from his hiding spot. His mind raced with new possibilities. If his grandmother had worked at the palace during the revolution, she would have been there during the chaos, the old regime's desperate final days, when loyalists were smuggling out anything of value before the new government could seize it. Maybe she hadn't stolen this treasure. Maybe she'd been protecting it. The distinction felt important, though Marcus couldn't say why. He gathered the nearest coins, marveling again at their weight and craftsmanship. Whatever the truth, he was now the keeper of secrets that men would kill for, and he was starting to understand just how dangerous that made him. The morning sun cast long shadows through the cottage windows as Marcus knelt beside the gaping hole in his grandmother's floor. The wooden chest sat open before him, its contents glittering like captured starlight. Even in daylight, the treasure seemed almost mythical. Ancient coins, jeweled daggers, ornate goblets, and strings of pearls that caught the light with every movement. His hands trembled as he lifted a golden medallion, studying the intricate engravings that depicted scenes he couldn't decipher. Where had his grandmother acquired such wealth? The woman who had darned his socks and fed him soup from chipped bowls had been sitting on a fortune that could buy kingdoms. A sharp knock at the cottage door sent ice through his veins. Marcus quickly threw the moth-eaten blanket over the chest and positioned himself to block the view of the damaged floorboards. "Marcus, you in there?" The voice belonged to Captain Aldrich. Marcus's throat went dry. "Just a moment, sir." He kicked loose boards under the hole and stepped carefully toward the door, his mind racing for explanations. When he opened it, Aldrich stood on the threshold with two other guards Marcus didn't recognize, stern-faced men with the bearing of palace investigators. "These gentlemen have some questions about your recent activities." Aldrich's weathered face was unreadable, but his tone carried an edge that made Marcus's stomach clench. The taller investigator stepped forward. "Guard Thorne, I'm Inspector Blackwood. We've received reports of unusual behavior. Mind if we come in?" It wasn't really a question. Marcus stepped aside, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Of course. though I'm not sure what you mean by unusual behavior. Blackwood's pale eyes swept the cottage's interior with practiced efficiency. You've been asking questions about historical artifacts at the Royal Library, making inquiries about authentication services. Rather curious interests for a palace guard, wouldn't you say? Marcus forced his expression to remain neutral, even as panic clawed at his chest. I inherited this place recently. I'm simply trying to understand its history. My grandmother left few records. The second investigator, a compact man with silver hair, moved deeper into the room. His gaze lingered on the area where Marcus stood, and for a terrifying moment, Marcus was certain the man could see through the floorboards to the treasure below. Understandable, Blackwood said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Tell me, have you discovered anything of particular interest during your renovations? The question hung in the air like a blade. Marcus's mouth felt full of cotton. Nothing beyond what you'd expect in an old cottage. Mice, rot, broken furniture. Captain Aldrich shifted uncomfortably. Marcus has been a loyal guard for 8 years. His record is spotless. I'm sure it is. Blackwood smiled, but it never reached his eyes. Still, we must be thorough. Recent intelligence suggests certain stolen royal artifacts may have found their way into private hands. Items of immense historical and monetary value. Marcus's blood turned to ice water. Stolen royal artifacts. The implications crashed over him like a tsunami. If the treasure beneath his feet belonged to the crown, he wasn't just sitting on a fortune, he was harboring evidence of theft, potentially treason. I see, Marcus managed. Amazed, his voice sounded steady. And you think these items might be here? The silver-haired investigator suddenly stopped moving. He tilted his head, listening. Do you hear that? Marcus strained his ears but heard nothing beyond his own thundering heartbeat. Hear what? Sounds like settling. Old houses do that. The man's eyes found Marcus's, especially when the foundation has been disturbed. Sweat trickled down Marcus's spine despite the morning chill. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. 3 trained men blocked his only exit, and even if he could somehow escape, where would he flee? His entire life was bound to the palace, the guard, his duty. Perhaps we should conduct a more thorough inspection, Blackwood suggested, reaching into his coat. Standard procedure, you understand. Of course, Marcus said, though the words felt like poison on his tongue. His mind raced through possibilities, each more desperate than the last. Could he claim ignorance if they found the chest? Pretend he'd never opened it? The scenario seemed laughably thin. Captain Aldrich frowned. Gentlemen, I hardly think— It's quite all right, Captain, Blackwood interrupted smoothly. I'm sure Guard Thorne has nothing to hide. His gaze locked with Marcus's. Do you guard Thorne? The question carried the weight of an accusation. Marcus felt the walls closing in, the cottage suddenly seeming far too small to contain the deadly secret beneath their feet. In the growing silence, he could swear he heard the treasure calling out, betraying him with every glint and gleam. Nothing at all, Marcus lied, sealing his fate with words that tasted like copper and desperation. Marcus stared at the ancient journal in his trembling hands, its leather cover worn smooth by countless fingers over the centuries. The candlelight flickered across yellowed pages, filled with his great-grandfather's cramped handwriting, each word a revelation that sent chills down his spine. The Brotherhood of the Iron Crown has protected this secret for 3 generations. What lies beneath Grandmother Elsa's cottage is not mere treasure. It is the lost crown jewels of the Old Kingdom, stolen during the Revolution of 1847 and hidden by loyalists who died before they could reclaim them. Marcus's breath caught. Crown jewels. Not just any treasure, but artifacts that belonged to the royal family he now served. The irony wasn't lost on him. A simple guard had unknowingly inherited the most valuable collection of royal artifacts in existence. The journal continued with meticulous detail about the cottage's construction, how the hiding place had been built into the foundation itself, designed to look like nothing more than a root cellar. His great-grandfather, Wilhelm, had been one of the last surviving members of the Brotherhood, tasked with keeping the secret until the rightful monarchy could be restored. But that restoration never came. Democracy had taken hold, and the old kingdom became a distant memory. Wilhelm had taken the secret to his grave, leaving only this journal hidden in a hollowed-out beam, a beam Marcus had discovered purely by accident when he'd leaned against it and heard the telltale rattle of something loose inside. A sharp crack from outside made Marcus freeze. He blew out the candle and crept to the window, peering through the dusty glass. In the moonlight, he could make out a figure moving through the overgrown garden, trying to stay hidden among the weeds and brambles. His blood turned to ice. Someone else was here. Marcus tucked the journal inside his jacket and grabbed the poker from beside the cold fireplace. He'd been so focused on reading that he'd lost track of time. How long had he been here? Who else might have seen him enter? Another sound, this time from the back of the cottage. Multiple footsteps, trying to be quiet but failing on the creaking wooden porch. Marcus realized with growing dread that he was surrounded. He thought of the loose floorboard in the back room, still slightly askew from when he'd pried it up earlier. If someone searched the cottage, they'd spot it immediately. The secret that had been safe for over a century would be exposed because of his carelessness. A door handle rattled. They were trying to get in. Marcus moved silently toward the back room, his guard training taking over. He knew how to move without making noise, how to breathe without being heard. But as he reached the doorway, he heard the front door creak open. "I know you're in here, Marcus." The voice was familiar, sending a shock of recognition through him. Captain Reeves. Marcus pressed himself against the wall, mind racing. How had Reeves found him? More importantly, how much did he know? "We followed you from the barracks," Reeves continued, his voice echoing in the small cottage. "Did you really think you could sneak off without anyone noticing? Especially after your mysterious inheritance suddenly made you the talk of the guard?" Footsteps moved through the front room. Marcus could hear at least two other people with Reeves, heavy boots that he recognized as standard guard issue. His fellow soldiers had turned against him. "The boys have been talking," Reeves called out, closer now, "saying you've been acting strange, secretive. And then there's the matter of your sudden wealth. New clothes, expensive meals at the tavern. Where exactly is a guard's salary coming from these days, Marcus?" Marcus gripped the poker tighter. They suspected, but they didn't know for certain. If he could just... "Found something!" The voice came from behind him. Sergeant Mills emerged from what must have been a side entrance Marcus hadn't known existed, blocking his escape route. Mills's eyes immediately went to the disturbed floorboard. "Well, well," Mills grinned, drawing his sword. "Looks like our boy Marcus has been doing some digging." Reeves appeared in the doorway, flanked by two more guards Marcus recognized, Thompson and Davies, men he'd served alongside for years, men he'd trusted with his life. "Now then," Reeves said, his hand resting casually on his sword hilt, "why don't you tell us what you found under those floorboards? And don't even think about lying. We've been watching you for days." Marcus's mind raced through his options. He was outnumbered 4-1, trapped in a cottage with only one visible exit. The journal in his jacket felt like it was burning against his chest, its secrets demanding protection. But as he looked at the faces of his former comrades, faces twisted with greed and betrayal, Marcus realized that the Brotherhood of the Iron Crown hadn't died with his great-grandfather. It had simply been waiting for a new guardian, and he'd be damned if he'd let these traitors claim what had been protected for over a century. The rain hammered against the cottage windows as Marcus crouched in the cellar, his hands trembling as he examined the ancient wooden chest. 3 days had passed since he discovered the cache of gold coins, and paranoia had become his constant companion. Every creak of the old house sent his heart racing. Every shadow in his peripheral vision made him reach for the knife he now kept strapped to his belt. The chest was larger than he'd initially realized, carved from what appeared to be oak and reinforced with iron bands that had somehow resisted decades of moisture and decay. Strange symbols were etched along its edges, not quite letters, not quite pictures, but something that seemed to dance between both. His grandmother had never mentioned anything like this, but then again, there were many things about Eleanor Whitmore that remained shrouded in mystery. Marcus lifted the heavy lid with careful precision. Inside, nestled in faded purple velvet, lay objects that defied explanation. Ancient scrolls tied with golden cord, a small silver dagger with a ruby-encrusted hilt, a collection of rings bearing seals he didn't recognize, and at the bottom, wrapped in oiled leather, a leather-bound journal written in his grandmother's distinctive handwriting. He opened the journal carefully, squinting in the dim candlelight. The first entry was dated 43 years ago, just after his grandfather's death. Henry is gone, and with him, any chance of a normal life. The Order grows suspicious. They believe he told me about the Meridian collection before he died, and they're right. But they'll never find what they're looking for. I've hidden it too well, scattered it across 3 locations. The cottage holds only a fraction of what they seek. Marcus's blood ran cold. The Meridian collection, he'd heard whispers of it during his training at the Royal Academy. Supposedly a myth, a collection of artifacts stolen from various kingdoms during the War of 7 Crowns 2 centuries ago. Historians debated whether it had ever truly existed. He flipped through more pages, his grandmother's careful script revealing a web of secrets that stretched back generations. The Whitmores hadn't been simple cottage dwellers. They'd been guardians, protectors of something far more valuable and dangerous than gold coins. Today, Marcus turned 16. He looked so much like Henry at that age, brave, stubborn, completely unaware of the forces moving around him. I pray he never learns the truth about what runs in his blood. The Order has killed for less. The Order. His grandmother mentioned them repeatedly throughout the journal, always with a mixture of fear and defiance. They seemed to be some sort of secret organization, one that had been hunting the Meridian collection for decades. And now, apparently, they were hunting him. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Marcus froze, his ears straining against the sound of rain. He'd locked all the doors, checked every window. The cottage was supposed to be secure. Another creak, deliberate and careful. He closed the journal and slipped it inside his jacket, then extinguished the candle. The cellar plunged into absolute darkness. Moving by, feel alone, he made his way to the narrow staircase that led to the kitchen. His hand found the knife at his belt. The footsteps above were moving toward the back of the house, toward the room where he'd first discovered the loose floorboards. Whoever was up there knew exactly what they were looking for. Marcus crept up the stairs, each step a careful negotiation with the ancient wood. At the top, he pressed his ear to the cellar door. Silence now, but he could feel a presence in the house, as tangible as smoke. He eased the door open an inch. Through the gap he could see into the kitchen. Moonlight filtered through the windows, casting everything in silver and shadow. A figure moved past the doorway, tall, dressed in dark clothing, moving with the practiced silence of someone accustomed to breaking into places they didn't belong. Marcus recognized the silhouette immediately. Captain Aldrich. His superior officer was examining the cottage with methodical precision, running his hands along the walls, testing floorboards with his feet. This wasn't a casual visit or a welfare check on a subordinate. Aldrich was searching for something specific. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. Aldrich was part of the Order his grandmother had written about. The man who'd trained him, mentored him, trusted him with increasingly sensitive assignments, he was one of them. How long had they known about his inheritance? How long had they been watching, waiting for him to lead them to what they sought? Marcus gripped the knife handle tighter. He had 2 choices, confront Aldrich now, or remain hidden and try to escape. But escape to where? If the Order had infiltrated the Royal Guard, how far did their reach extend? Aldrich's footsteps moved toward the cellar door. Marcus made his decision. He couldn't run forever, and he couldn't hide in his own house. If they wanted the Meridian collection, they'd have to come through him first. He kicked the door open and lunged forward, the knife gleaming in the moonlight. Marcus pressed his back against the cold stone wall of the castle's eastern tower, heart hammering as footsteps echoed in the corridor beyond. The ancient passageway he'd discovered behind a loose stone had saved his life, but for how long? Captain Aldrich's voice carried through the walls, barking orders to search every room, every corner, every shadow. He's got to be here somewhere. The bastard couldn't have made it past the gates. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that he was now a fugitive in the very castle he'd sworn to protect. 3 days had passed since Victor's death. 3 days of accusations and mounting evidence that painted him as a cold-blooded killer. Someone had planted Victor's blood on Marcus's spare uniform. Someone had forged entries in the guard logs showing Marcus leaving his post at the exact time of the murder. Someone was playing a very dangerous game, and Marcus was the pawn being sacrificed. He'd tried reasoning with Aldrich, tried explaining about the treasure, about the mysterious map, about the cottage's deadly secrets. But each word had only deepened the captain's suspicion. Why would a simple guard inherit such wealth? Why hadn't he reported the discovery immediately? The questions had reasonable answers, but fear and greed had a way of drowning out reason. Elena was the only one who believed him, and now she was risking everything to help him. She'd left food in predetermined locations, passed along intelligence about guard movements, even stolen a master key from the captain's quarters. Without her, Marcus would have been captured or killed already. The footsteps faded, and Marcus crept deeper into the hidden network of passages that honeycombed the ancient castle. His grandmother's journal had mentioned these tunnels in passing, servant corridors from centuries past when the castle housed a full royal court. Now they were his lifeline. He emerged through a concealed panel in the archives, dust motes dancing in shafts of moonlight that filtered through high windows. The musty smell of old parchment and binding leather filled his nostrils as he moved carefully between towering shelves. If his suspicions were correct, somewhere in these forgotten records lay proof of his innocence, or at least proof of someone else's guilt. Victor's final words haunted him. They know about the map. Not I know, but they. Victor hadn't been working alone. Someone else had orchestrated the break-in, someone with enough influence to manipulate evidence and turn the entire guard against Marcus. But who? Hours passed as Marcus searched through genealogical records, property deeds, and historical accounts. His grandmother's maiden name appeared in several documents. The Blackwood family had deeper roots in this region than he'd realized. One particular entry caught his attention, a record of a bitter legal dispute from 50 years ago over mining rights to land that included his grandmother's property. The opposing party in that long-ago lawsuit bore a familiar surname, Aldrich. Marcus felt the pieces clicking into place. Captain Aldrich's family had fought for decades to claim the mineral rights beneath Marcus's inherited land. They'd lost in court, but perhaps they'd never given up. If Aldrich knew about the treasure's true location, if he understood that the cottage was merely the entrance to something far more valuable underground. A soft scraping sound made Marcus freeze. Someone was moving through the archives. He closed the ledger and slipped behind a massive shelf of bound tax records, controlling his breathing as footsteps approached his hiding spot. "I know you're in here, Marcus." Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "It's safe. I'm alone." Relief flooded through him as she appeared between the shelves, her face pale in the moonlight. She pressed a cloth bundle into his hands, more food and a change of clothes. "They're planning to storm the cottage at dawn," she said, urgently. "Aldrich convinced the magistrate that you've hidden evidence there. They'll tear the place apart." "Let them," Marcus replied. "The real treasure is deeper than they imagine. But Elena, I found something else." He showed her the legal documents, explaining his theory about Aldrich's family connection. Her eyes widened as understanding dawned. "That's why he was so interested when the other guards were mocking you about inheriting a worthless cottage. He knew it wasn't worthless. And when I discovered the treasure and Victor tried to steal the map, Aldrich saw his chance. Frame me for murder, seize the property as evidence, and claim his family's prize at last. We need proof," Elena said. "Something that will convince the magistrate. There might be more records at the cottage itself. My grandmother kept detailed journals. If she knew about the Aldrich family's attempts to claim the land... Marcus trailed off, then made a decision that would either save his life or end it. I have to go back there. Tonight, before they arrive at dawn. Elena gripped his arm. That's suicide. They'll be watching the cottage. Not if they think I'm still trapped in the castle. Marcus managed a grim smile. Besides, I know a way in that they don't. My grandmother taught me well. The abandoned warehouse reeked of rust and decay, its broken windows casting jagged shadows across the concrete floor. Marcus arrived first, his hand instinctively resting on his service weapon as he surveyed the cavernous space. The anonymous note had been slipped under his apartment door sometime during the night warehouse district, Building 47. Midnight. Come alone if you want answers about your grandmother. He'd almost thrown it away, dismissed it as another attempt to rattle him. But something about the handwriting nagged at him. Formal, precise, almost archaic in its careful script, it reminded him of the old letters he'd found tucked away in his grandmother's recipe box. Footsteps echoed from the entrance, and Marcus tensed until he recognized the silhouette. Detective Sarah Chen stepped into the dim light, her expression grim. You got one too? Before Marcus could respond, two more figures emerged from the shadows, an elderly man in an expensive coat and a woman Marcus didn't recognize, both moving with the careful deliberation of people accustomed to dangerous situations. Well, well, the old man said, his voice carrying a slight accent Marcus couldn't place. The Guardian arrives at last. Who are you? Marcus demanded, his hand moving closer to his weapon. The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. My name is Victor Kozlov. I knew your grandmother very well, Mr. Sterling, better than you might imagine. The woman stepped forward, and Marcus caught sight of a faded scar running along her jawline. My name is Elena Vasquez. I've been watching your cottage for 3 months, waiting for someone to finally understand what they'd found. Sarah moved to Marcus's side, her own hand near her holster. Understanding seems to be in short supply lately. Maybe you'd like to explain why we're all here? Victor reached into his coat, slowly, deliberately, and withdrew a manila envelope. Because your grandmother, Mr. Sterling, was not the simple woman you believed her to be. She was a guardian, as were her parents before her. And now, whether you like it or not, that responsibility has fallen to you. Guardian of what? Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. Elena answered. Of something that 3 governments and half a dozen criminal organizations would kill for, something that's been hidden in that cottage for over 60 years. Victor opened the envelope and pulled out a series of photographs, black and white, clearly decades old. He laid them on a rusted metal drum that served as an impromptu table. Marcus stepped closer and felt his breath catch. The photos showed his grandmother, but not as he'd ever known her. This woman was younger, harder, dressed in dark clothing and standing beside men with serious faces and military bearing. In one image, she was holding what looked like a carved wooden box, the same box Marcus had found buried beneath the cottage. During the war, Victor continued, certain artifacts went missing from museums and private collections across Europe, items of immense historical and monetary value. Your grandmother was part of a network that, shall we say, ensured these treasures didn't fall into the wrong hands. She was a thief, Marcus said flatly. She was a protector, Elena corrected sharply. She risked her life to keep these artifacts safe while the world burned around her. The plan was always to return them once the war ended, but circumstances complicated things. Sarah stepped forward, studying the photographs. What kind of circumstances? Victor's expression darkened. The kind that required new identities, new lives, new countries. Your grandmother came to America with a collection worth millions, Mr. Sterling, but she could never safely liquidate it. So she waited, she protected it, and she planned to pass that responsibility to someone she could trust. That's why Reeves and the others have been circling, Elena added. Word has gotten out. There are people who've been searching for this collection for decades. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. How many people know? Too many, Victor admitted. We've managed to eliminate some of the threats, but others keep surfacing. That attack on your cottage wasn't random, and it won't be the last. Eliminate? Sarah's voice carried a dangerous edge. Elena met her gaze steadily. This isn't a game, detective. The people hunting this collection have killed for far less. We do what we must to protect it. Marcus stared at the photographs, trying to reconcile the woman in the images with his memories of flower-dusted aprons and bedtime stories. What am I supposed to do with this information? You have 3 choices, Victor said, gathering the photos. You can try to return the artifacts to their rightful owners, a process that will take years and likely get you killed. You can sell everything and disappear, though I doubt you'll stay hidden for long. Or you can become what your grandmother was, a guardian. We can help you establish proper security, create the right documentation, ensure the collection is properly protected until the time comes to make it public. The warehouse fell silent, except for the distant sound of wind through broken glass. Marcus realized that his simple inheritance had become something far more complex and far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town felt like a tomb when Marcus arrived at midnight. Exactly as the anonymous note had instructed, his service weapon sat heavy against his hip, though he doubted it would provide much comfort against whoever had been orchestrating the chaos that had consumed his life. The treasure, what remained of it, sat secured in a safety deposit box across town, but the damage was already done. Too many people knew, and too many were willing to kill for their share. Footsteps echoed from the shadows before a figure emerged into the pale moonlight, streaming through broken windows. Marcus's blood ran cold as he recognized the weathered face of Captain Morrison, his commanding officer for the past 8 years. "You look surprised, son," Morrison said, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone Marcus had respected for nearly a decade, though the first suppose you shouldn't be. Who else would have access to your personnel files, your duty roster, your grandmother's property records? The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Morrison had been the one feeding information to whoever wanted Marcus eliminated. The captain who had mentored him, who had written his commendations, who had stood at his father's funeral and promised to watch over him. The break-ins, the surveillance, Collins's death, that was all you. Marcus kept his hand away from his weapon, knowing Morrison would be watching for any sudden movement. Morrison circled him slowly, like a predator sizing up wounded prey. Collins got greedy, started talking about going to internal affairs, threatening to expose our operation. Some secrets are too valuable to let slip away because of one man's conscience. Our operation? Marcus's mind raced. Who else is involved? Does it matter? You're here, alone, just like we planned. Morrison's hand rested casually on his holstered pistol. The way I see it, you've got 2 choices. Share the wealth like a good soldier, or join Collins in an early grave. Marcus forced himself to appear calm while his thoughts churned. He'd suspected corruption in the department, but Morrison's involvement cut deeper than any betrayal he'd imagined. How long have you known about my grandmother's cottage? Longer than you'd think. Your dear old grandmother wasn't as innocent as she seemed. That cottage was a way station during the war, part of a network that moved more than just refugees. Art, gold, jewelry, stolen from wealthy families fleeing the advancing armies. She was supposed to pass it along, but greed got the better of her. The revelation struck Marcus like a physical blow. His grandmother, the woman who had taught him about honor and integrity, had been a thief. Everything he thought he knew about his family crumbled in an instant. She never told you, did she? Morrison's smile was cruel. How she funded your father's education, your family's comfortable lifestyle. That treasure you found was blood money, Marcus, stolen from desperate people who trusted her to help them escape. You're lying. Am I? Check the records yourself, if you live long enough. Morrison drew his weapon with practiced ease. The families we represented have been looking for those artifacts for decades. They hired us to find them, to return what was stolen. But seeing the sheer value involved, we decided a new arrangement might be more profitable. Marcus understood now why his grandmother had never spoken about the war years, why she'd insisted the cottage remain untouched after her death. She hadn't been protecting treasure. She'd been protecting her family from the truth of how their prosperity had been built. "So what happens now?" Marcus asked, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. "Now you tell me where the real treasure is hidden. We found your little safety deposit box, but it only contained a fraction of what was beneath those floorboards. Smart of you to move it, but not smart enough." Marcus almost smiled. His paranoia had saved his life, at least temporarily. After Collins's murder, he'd divided the remaining treasure among multiple locations, trusting no single bank or storage facility with the complete collection. "And if I refuse? Then this becomes a tragic story of a corrupt guard who killed his partner for a share of stolen treasure before taking his own life in guilt. The evidence is already planted at your apartment. Collins's blood on your spare uniform, cash transfers to offshore accounts, even a confession note written in your handwriting." The web of conspiracy was more elaborate than Marcus had imagined. Morrison hadn't just been planning to steal the treasure, he'd been preparing to frame Marcus for everything that had gone wrong. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer with each passing second. Morrison's confident expression flickered with uncertainty. "Expecting someone?" Marcus asked. The warehouse doors burst open as armed figures poured in from multiple entrances. But these weren't police uniforms Marcus recognized. They were federal agents, moving with military precision. Morrison spun toward the nearest exit, his weapon raised, but laser sights already painted his chest with deadly red dots. Someone had been playing a deeper game than either of them realized. The abandoned warehouse on Pier 17 reeked of salt, rust, and decay. Marcus crouched behind a stack of rotting crates, the duffel bag containing 2 million in bearer bonds pressed against his ribs. His heart hammered as he checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes until the exchange. He'd chosen this location carefully. Multiple exit routes, clear sight lines, and far enough from the city center that gunshots wouldn't immediately draw attention. The moonlight streaming through broken skylights cast eerie shadows across the concrete floor, creating perfect hiding spots for both him and whoever else might be lurking in the darkness. A metallic clang echoed from the far end of the warehouse. Marcus tensed, his hand instinctively moving to the service pistol holstered beneath his jacket. Another sound. Footsteps on metal stairs. Someone was coming down from the office level. "Right on time," a familiar voice called out. Marcus's blood turned to ice. Captain Reeves emerged from the shadows, flanked by 2 figures Marcus didn't recognize, muscle for hire by the look of them. "Though I have to admit, I'm disappointed you actually showed up." Marcus rose slowly, keeping the bag visible but his other hand free. "Where's Sarah?" "Safe. For now." Reeves smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You know, Marcus, when I first heard about your little inheritance, I thought it was just another sob story. Poor guard gets a worthless cottage, cue the violins." Then Rodriguez started asking questions, getting himself into places he shouldn't have been. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. "You killed him." Rodriguez was a good soldier, but he got greedy. Started thinking he deserved a bigger cut than I was willing to offer. Reeves gestured to his companions, who began spreading out, cutting off Marcus's escape routes. "Just like you're about to do, I imagine." Marcus's mind raced. The warehouse had 3 exits, the main door behind Reeves, a loading dock to his left, and an emergency exit near the back wall. All were now blocked, but he'd planned for this possibility. "The bonds are in the bag," Marcus said, slowly unzipping it to show the neat stacks of certificates. 2 million, just like you asked. Now where's my sister?" Reeves laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the warehouse walls. "Your sister is the least of your problems right now. See, I've been thinking about our arrangement, and I've decided it's not quite equitable. You get to keep your life and your secret fortune, while I get a measly 2 million? That hardly seems fair." One of Reeves's men had moved close enough that Marcus could smell his cigarette breath. The other was positioning himself near a stack of machinery, assault rifle casually aimed in Marcus's direction. Professional killers, not just street thugs. "What do you want?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. "Everything. The location of the real treasure, access to your grandmother's cottage, and a full accounting of exactly what you found down there." Reeves pulled out his own weapon, a sleek automatic that gleamed in the moonlight. "Oh, and your life, naturally. Can't have you running to internal affairs with tales of corruption in the ranks." Marcus had expected this betrayal, but it still stung. Reeves had been his captain for 3 years, had written his performance reviews, had even attended his birthday party last spring. Now the man was talking about killing him as casually as discussing the weather. "You made one mistake," Marcus said, taking a half-step backward toward a support pillar. "Only one? How disappointing." "What's that?" "You assumed I came alone." The sniper's bullet took out the man with the assault rifle before the sound of the gunshot even registered. Marcus dove behind the pillar as chaos erupted. Detective Chen and her tactical team poured through the loading dock entrance, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. "Drop your weapons," Chen's amplified voice boomed through the warehouse. "This is the police." Reeves fired wildly in Marcus's direction, concrete chips exploding from the pillar inches from his head. The second hired gun had taken cover behind an overturned table, returning fire at the police positions. Muzzle flashes lit up the warehouse like deadly fireworks. Marcus pulled out his phone and activated the recording app he'd been running since entering the warehouse. Reeves's confession was all captured, every incriminating word. But first, he had to survive long enough to use it. "Sarah's not here," Reeves shouted over the gunfire. "You'll never find her without me." The captain was retreating toward the emergency exit, using the confusion to make his escape. Marcus couldn't let that happen. Everything depended on Reeves being taken alive, Sarah's location, the extent of the corruption in the guard unit, the identity of whoever else was involved in this conspiracy. Marcus sprinted from cover, pursuing his former captain into the maze of shadows and steel that filled the warehouse's rear section. Behind him, the firefight continued, but his focus had narrowed to a single objective, stopping Reeves before he disappeared forever. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town felt like a tomb when Marcus arrived at midnight. His footsteps echoed against the concrete walls as he made his way toward the center of the cavernous space, the duffel bag heavy in his grip. 3 days had passed since Elena's ultimatum, 3 days of sleepless nights and careful planning. He wasn't alone for long. Shadows moved in the darkness, and soon figures emerged from behind shipping containers and steel pillars. Elena stepped forward first, her platinum hair catching the moonlight streaming through broken skylights. Behind her, 2 men Marcus didn't recognize flanked her sides, muscle by the look of their builds and the way they carried themselves. "You came," she said, genuine surprise coloring her voice. "I wasn't entirely certain you would. I keep my word." Marcus set the bag down but didn't step away from it. "Unlike some people." Elena's smile was razor-thin. "Still bitter about our past? How delightfully predictable." She gestured to the bag. "Is it all there?" "Half. Diamonds and some of the smaller pieces, just like you asked. The rest comes when you prove my sister is alive and unharmed." Cautious. "I can respect that." Elena snapped her fingers, and one of her men disappeared back into the shadows. Minutes later, the sound of a vehicle approached from outside. Marcus tensed, his hand instinctively moving toward the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. The warehouse's side door groaned open, and 2 more figures entered, one of them supporting the other. Even in the dim light, he recognized Sarah's silhouette immediately. "Marcus!" Her voice cracked as she called out, and he could see she was favoring her left leg. "Let her go," he demanded, taking a step forward. "You have what you want. Actually, there's been a slight change of plans." Elena's voice carried a new edge that made Marcus's blood run cold. "You see, while you've been playing the dutiful brother, I've been doing my research. That cottage of yours, it has quite the fascinating history." Marcus kept his expression neutral, but his mind raced. What are you talking about? Oh, come now. Did you really think 120 million in perfectly preserved artifacts just happened to end up under your grandmother's floorboards? The Raven Crest collection didn't simply vanish into thin air in 1943. It was hidden by someone who knew exactly where to put it. The temperature in the warehouse seemed to drop several degrees. My grandmother had nothing to do with whatever you think. Your grandmother was Magdalena Kovac. Elena's words hit like physical blows. Youngest daughter of the Kovac family, the most notorious art thieves in Eastern Europe before the war. She didn't just stumble upon those artifacts, Marcus. She stole them. Sarah's gasp echoed across the concrete expanse. Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his feet, not just literally, but everything he thought he knew about his family, his inheritance, his grandmother's mysterious past. You're lying. The records don't lie. Immigration documents, passenger manifests, even some surviving Interpol files from the 1940s. Magdalena Kovac disappeared from Prague in 1942, right around the time the Raven Crest collection went missing. She surfaced 3 years later in London as Maggie Cross, a war widow with a compelling story and papers that were remarkably well forged for the time. Marcus's throat felt dry as sandpaper. Even if that's true, it doesn't change our deal. Oh, but it does. Elena began walking slowly around him, like a predator circling wounded prey. You see, the Kovac family didn't work alone. They had partners, benefactors, people who financed their operations in exchange for shares of the profits. My family being one of them. The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. This was never about the money you owed those people. Very good. This was always about reclaiming what was stolen from my family 60 years ago. The debt was just a convenient way to apply pressure. Elena stopped directly in front of him. So here's the new arrangement. You're going to give me everything, all of it, and in exchange, your sister lives. And if I refuse, then you'll both join your grandmother in whatever afterlife awaits thieves and their descendants. Marcus looked across the warehouse at Sarah, saw the fear in her eyes, but also something else, determination. She gave him the slightest nod, and he knew she understood what he was thinking. There's just one problem with your story, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. If my grandmother really was this master thief you claim, don't you think she would have taught her family a few tricks? Elena's confident expression flickered for just a moment. What do you mean? Marcus smiled grimly and pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over a single number. I mean, the bag is rigged with enough explosives to turn this warehouse into a crater. And unless my sister walks out of here in the next 60 seconds, we're all going to find out what comes after this life a lot sooner than planned. The silence that followed was deafening. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town looked like a graveyard for forgotten dreams. Marcus pulled his car behind a stack of rusted shipping containers, his heart hammering against his ribs. The phone in his pocket buzzed with another text from Elena. Don't do this alone. Wait for backup. He turned it off. Captain Reeves had been clear in his instructions. Come alone. Bring the location of the remaining treasure. No weapons, no tricks, or Sarah would disappear forever. Marcus touched the folded paper in his jacket pocket. A fake map he'd spent hours creating, detailed enough to buy him time, but worthless enough to protect what was left of his grandmother's legacy. The warehouse door stood slightly ajar, darkness yawning beyond it like an open mouth. Marcus stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Shafts of dying sunlight pierced through broken skylights, illuminating dust motes that danced like ghosts. Punctual as always, Marcus. Captain Reeves emerged from behind a concrete pillar, looking nothing like the distinguished officer who'd commanded respect for over 2 decades. His uniform was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot with desperation. I always appreciated that about you. Where is she? Safe, for now. Reeves gestured toward the shadows. You know, I never wanted it to come to this. 23 years of service, and what do I have to show for it? a pension that won't cover my ex-wife's medical bills, a mortgage on a house I'll never own, and the respect of men who'll forget my name the day I retire. Marcus kept his hands visible, his voice steady. This isn't the way to solve your problems, Captain. Isn't it? Reeves laughed bitterly. You stumbled into more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes. Your grandmother was a cleaning lady, Marcus. A cleaning lady who somehow accumulated a fortune that could change everything for everyone involved. She earned every penny. Did she? Or did she find it the same way you did, hidden away by someone who couldn't claim it legally? Reeves began circling Marcus slowly, a predator sizing up prey. I've been thinking about that. About how a woman who cleaned offices and houses managed to hide away millions in gold and artifacts. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the warehouse's concrete walls. His grandmother had always been secretive about her past, especially the years before she'd married his grandfather. Stories about the war, about working for wealthy families, had always seemed fragmented, incomplete. It doesn't matter how she got it, Marcus said. It's gone now anyway. The authorities seized most of it, but not all. Reeves stopped directly in front of him. See, I know about the second location. Your grandmother was clever, too clever to keep everything in one place. There's more, and you're going to tell me where. A sound from the shadows made Marcus turn. Sarah emerged, her hands bound, a gag around her mouth. Behind her walked Detective Morrison, his weapon drawn but pointed at the ground. The betrayal hit Marcus like a physical blow. Sorry, kid, Morrison said, though he didn't sound sorry at all. Retirement's expensive these days. Marcus forced himself to remain calm. How many others? How many people are you planning to cut into this deal? Just us 3, Reeves said. Nice, even split, plenty to go around. And after you get what you want, you think you can just let us walk away? The silence that followed answered his question more clearly than words ever could. Marcus pulled the folded paper from his pocket, holding it up. This is what you want. The location of the second cache. But I want proof Sarah is okay first. Reeves nodded to Morrison, who removed Sarah's gag. She gasped, her eyes finding Marcus immediately. It's a trap, she said. There are others. Morrison quickly replaced the gag, but it was too late. Marcus saw movement in the shadows beyond the pillars. More figures, more people who'd learned about the treasure and wanted their share. His heart sank as he realized how much the situation had spiraled beyond Reeves' control. Captain, Marcus said quietly, you need to understand something. Once word gets out about this kind of money, it doesn't stop with just 3 people. Every corrupt cop, every criminal with connections, every desperate person looking for an easy score, they all come calling. Reeves' confidence flickered for the first time. We can handle it. Can you? Because right now I count at least 6 people in here, and I'm betting some of them aren't on your payroll. As if summoned by his words, a voice called out from the darkness. Nobody move! This warehouse is surrounded. Elena's voice. Marcus had never been happier to hear someone disobey his instructions. The warehouse erupted into chaos as figures scattered in every direction, shouting and confusion echoing off the concrete walls. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town felt like a tomb when Marcus arrived at midnight, his footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, casting skeletal shadows across the floor. He'd chosen this place deliberately, isolated, with multiple exits, and far from prying eyes. The duffel bag containing $2 million in unmarked bills felt heavier than it should have as he set it down in the center of the main floor. 30 minutes later, the sound of approaching vehicles cut through the silence. Marcus positioned himself behind a concrete pillar, hand resting on his service weapon. This meeting could go sideways fast, and he'd learned not to trust anyone completely, not even himself anymore. Captain Reynolds entered first, flanked by 3 other guards Marcus didn't recognize. Their faces were hard, professional, but their eyes held the hungry gleam he'd seen too often lately. Behind them came Viktor Kozlov, the Russian businessman who'd been circling the treasure like a shark, since word had leaked beyond the palace walls. Marcus, Reynolds called out. his voice carrying an authority that felt hollow in this desolate place. "Good to see you've come to your senses." "Have I?" Marcus stepped out from behind the pillar, keeping his distance. "Because this feels more like extortion than negotiation." Victor laughed, a sound like grinding glass. "In my country, we have saying, when you find bear in woods, you don't argue about who owns trees. You found treasure, yes, but now whole forest is watching." The Russian's broken English didn't mask the threat in his words. Marcus had done his research on Victor, former Spetsnaz, connected to organizations that made problems disappear permanently. The kind of man who viewed violence as a business expense. "2 million, Marcus said, nudging the bag with his foot. "That's what we agreed on. You get this, and you disappear. Forever." Reynolds shook his head. "The price has changed. We've been thinking—" "We?" Marcus cut him off. Funny how quickly "we" formed when money entered the picture. "The risks have increased." One of Reynolds' men spoke up, a guard named Patterson, whom Marcus barely knew. "Keeping quiet isn't as simple as we thought. Too many people asking questions." Marcus felt the familiar weight of betrayal settling on his shoulders. He'd been naive to think this would end with a simple payoff. Greed had a way of growing, of demanding more and more, until it consumed everything in its path. "So what are you proposing?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. Victor stepped forward, his coat falling open to reveal the butt of a pistol. 50-50 split. You keep half, we divide other half. Everyone happy, everyone rich, everyone alive. The last word hung in the air like a blade. Marcus calculated quickly. 50% of 120 million was $60 million. Life-changing money, enough to disappear forever. But giving in now would only invite more demands later. "And if I refuse, then we explore other options," Reynolds said quietly. "Options that don't require your cooperation." The threat was clear. Marcus had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but he'd prepared for the possibility. His hand moved slowly toward his jacket pocket, where his phone waited with a single number programmed to speed dial. "Before you make any final decisions," Marcus said, "there's something you should know." He pulled out his phone, finger hovering over the call button. "Agent Sarah Chen, FBI Financial Crimes Division. She's been investigating unusual bank activity for the past week. Seems someone's been asking a lot of questions about currency exchange rates and offshore accounts." The color drained from Reynolds' face. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Marcus held up the phone. "One call, and this whole warehouse is surrounded in 10 minutes. She's been very interested in my story about corrupt palace guards and Russian businessmen with questionable backgrounds." Victor's hand moved toward his weapon, but Marcus was faster, drawing his service pistol in one smooth motion. The other guards reached for their weapons, creating a tense standoff in the moonlit warehouse. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "You're all going to walk away. Tonight. Forever. And in exchange, Agent Chen never hears about any of this." "You think you can threaten us?" Patterson snarled. "I think I'm the only one here who's not stupid enough to commit felonies in front of a federal investigation," Marcus replied. "But please, test my theory." The silence stretched until Victor finally laughed and raised his hands. "Smart boy. Is good bluff. It's not a bluff. Even better." The Russian stepped backward toward the exit. "But remember, bears have long memories. Forest is big place, many dark corners." As the group retreated, Marcus kept his weapon drawn and his phone ready. Victory felt hollow when it came wrapped in threats and temporary truces. The treasure that was supposed to solve his problems had only multiplied them exponentially. The sound of Marcus's footsteps echoed through the empty warehouse as he made his way toward the center of the cavernous space. Moonlight streamed through broken windows, casting skeletal shadows across the concrete floor. He clutched the leather satchel containing $50,000, a fraction of what lay hidden beneath his grandmother's cottage, but enough to buy himself time. Right on schedule came a voice from the darkness. Captain Reeves emerged from behind a stack of rusted shipping containers, flanked by two figures Marcus recognized immediately, Sergeant Torres and Officer Kelman. The betrayal shouldn't have surprised him anymore, but seeing his former colleagues standing there like hired thugs still sent a chill down his spine. "Where's Elena?" Marcus demanded, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his chest. Reeves smiled coldly. "Safe for now. Though I have to say, she's proven quite resourceful. Did you know she managed to slip a tracking device into Detective Morrison's pocket before we took her? Clever girl." Marcus's hand tightened on the satchel. That explained how Elena had known to send him that cryptic text about the warehouse location. She was still fighting, even in captivity. "The money's here," Marcus said, holding up the bag. 50,000, as promised. Now let her go." "Oh." Marcus Reeves shook his head as if disappointed in a slow student. "You really think this is about $50,000? We know what you found under those floorboards. We know about the Revolutionary War treasure, the gold coins, the jewelry, $120 million, give or take." Torres stepped forward, his hand resting on his service weapon. "We also know you moved it. Our sources at the cottage found the hiding place empty except for some worthless family photos." Marcus forced himself to remain calm. After discovering the bodies of the two intruders Elena had shot, he'd made the decision to relocate the treasure. It now sat in 3 separate safety deposit boxes across the county, registered under false names with documentation he'd purchased from one of the petty criminals he'd arrested months ago. The irony wasn't lost on him. "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus lied smoothly. "I found some old coins and sold them to a dealer in the city. 50,000 was all I got." Kelman laughed harshly. "You expect us to believe that? We've seen the insurance records your grandmother filed back in the 80s. She knew exactly what she had hidden under there." The pieces suddenly clicked into place for Marcus. "You killed her, didn't you? That wasn't a natural death at all." Reeves's expression didn't change. "Your grandmother was a stubborn old woman who refused to be reasonable. She claimed the treasure was meant for family, not to be shared with those who could help her protect it. Such a waste." Rage flared in Marcus's chest, but he channeled it into focus. He needed to get Elena out of here alive, and that meant playing along until he could find an advantage. "Even if I knew where this supposed treasure was," Marcus said, "what makes you think I'd trust you enough to share it? You've already proven you're willing to kill for it." "Because," said a new voice from the shadows, "you don't have a choice." Marcus's blood turned to ice as Detective Morrison stepped into the light, dragging Elena behind him. Her hands were bound, and a strip of duct tape covered her mouth, but her eyes blazed with defiance. A thin line of blood trickled from her temple where someone had struck her. "Hello, Marcus," Morrison said casually. "Sorry about the deception, but business is business." The corrupt detective's betrayal stung, but Marcus couldn't afford to dwell on it. He scanned the warehouse, looking for anything he could use as a weapon or distraction. The building was largely empty except for the shipping containers and some scattered debris. "Here's how this works," Reeves continued. "You're going to tell us exactly where you moved the treasure. Then you're going to help us retrieve it. In exchange, Ms. Vasquez lives, and you get a small percentage for your cooperation. And if I refuse—" Morrison pressed the barrel of his gun against Elena's temple. "Then she dies right here, and we spend however long it takes finding the treasure ourselves. Your grandmother eventually told us what we needed to know. I'm confident you will too." Elena's eyes met Marcus's across the space between them. Despite the tape covering her mouth, he could read her expression clearly. Don't give them anything. Don't let them win. But staring at the woman he'd come to love, bound and bleeding because of his discovery, Marcus felt his resolve wavering. The treasure had already cost his grandmother her life and turned his fellow guards into enemies. How much more blood would be spilled before this was over? "You have 30 seconds to decide," Reeves said, checking his watch with theatrical precision. Marcus closed his eyes and made his choice. The warehouse smelled of rust and decay, its broken windows casting jagged shadows across the concrete floor. Marcus crouched behind a stack of rotting pallets, his heart hammering against his ribs as he watched Captain Voss pace back and forth near the center of the cavernous space. The treasure, his grandmother's legacy, sat in metal cases arranged like an altar, gleaming even in the dim light. "You're late, Thorn," Voss called out, his voice echoing off the walls. "But then again, you always were slow to follow orders." Marcus stepped into the open, keeping his hands visible. "I'm here. Let Elena go." Voss laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Straight to business. I always respected that about you." He gestured to his left, where Elena sat tied to a chair, duct tape across her mouth. Her eyes were fierce with anger rather than fear, and Marcus felt a surge of admiration for her courage. "The treasure for the girl," Marcus said. "That was the deal." "Oh, but deals can change." Voss pulled out his service weapon, keeping it lowered but ready. "See, I've been thinking about our little arrangement. Why should I let either of you walk away? You've seen too much, know too much, and she's been asking too many questions around town." Marcus's mind raced. He'd anticipated this betrayal, but seeing Elena in danger made his carefully laid plans feel suddenly fragile. "The other guards are loyal to you. They won't ask questions if we disappear." "Briggs and Castillo? They're already asking questions." "But accidents happen all the time. Gas leaks, car crashes. Tragic, really." Voss's smile was predatory. "Your grandmother understood the value of secrets, kept this treasure hidden for 70 years. But she made one mistake. She trusted family." The pieces clicked together in Marcus's mind with crystalline clarity. "You killed her." "I helped her along, yes." The old woman was getting sentimental in her final days. Started talking about confessing, about returning what wasn't rightfully hers. Couldn't have that. Voss raised his weapon. "She fought harder than I expected for someone so frail. Managed to hide the map before I could find it." Rage flooded through Marcus like molten steel. His grandmother hadn't died peacefully in her sleep. She'd been murdered by someone she'd trusted, someone who'd sat at her kitchen table, accepted her hospitality, pretended to care. "The break-in at my cottage," Marcus said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "That was you too, looking for any clues she might have left behind. Imagine my surprise when you found the treasure instead. Made things simpler, really." Voss stepped closer to the cases. "This collection represents decades of careful acquisition. Art stolen by the Nazis, recovered by the resistance, hidden by survivors like your grandmother. A shame to break it up, but $120 million requires certain sacrifices." Elena made a muffled sound behind her gag, struggling against her bonds. Voss glanced at her with casual indifference. "She's got spirit, I'll give her that." Kept insisting she was just a local historian, nothing more, but historians have a way of uncovering inconvenient truths. He turned back to Marcus. "Last chance, Thorn. Walk away now, and I'll make it quick." Marcus slowly reached into his jacket pocket. "There's something you should know about those pieces. Hands where I can see them." "Easy." Marcus pulled out a small device, no bigger than a matchbox. "This is a GPS tracker. I attached one to each case while I was loading them. My insurance policy." Voss's confidence wavered. "You're bluffing. Detective Sarah Chen knows where I am. If I don't check in within the next 10 minutes, she'll track the signal and find this place, along with enough evidence to connect you to my grandmother's murder and Elena's kidnapping." It was a lie, but Marcus sold it with the same calm authority he'd used during years of palace duty. The captain's eyes darted between Marcus and the treasure, calculating odds. "You wouldn't risk the girl's life. You're going to kill us anyway. At least this way, you go down with us." For a moment, the warehouse fell silent, except for the distant sound of traffic. Marcus could see Voss weighing his options, greed warring with self-preservation. The captain had spent years building his reputation, his career. The thought of losing everything made his jaw clench with visible tension. "You know what your problem is, Thorn? You never learned when to quit." Voss raised his weapon toward Elena. "Maybe watching her die will change your mind about..." The shot rang out like thunder in the enclosed space. But it wasn't Voss who fired. Detective Chen stepped through a side entrance, her service weapon trained on the captain. "Drop it, Voss, now." Behind her came Officers Briggs and Castillo, their faces grim with betrayal and disappointment. The captain's shoulders sagged as he realized his world was crumbling around him. "How?" Voss whispered. Marcus smiled grimly. "Some secrets are worth keeping. Others need to see the light." The morning sun cast long shadows across the overgrown garden as Marcus stood on the cottage front porch, breathing in the crisp air that carried the scent of wild roses and freedom. 3 months had passed since that night when everything unraveled, when Captain Thorne's greed finally consumed him, when the ancient treasure beneath these very floorboards had transformed from blessing to curse and back again. The cottage looked different now. Fresh paint gleamed on the shutters, new shingles crowned the roof, and the foundation had been properly reinforced. But Marcus had been careful to preserve its character, the weathered stones and climbing ivy that made it feel like home. His grandmother would have approved. "You sure you want to go through with this?" Elena's voice drifted from the doorway behind him. She emerged carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee, her detective's badge replaced by casual clothes and a smile that reached her eyes. Marcus accepted the mug gratefully, wrapping his fingers around its warmth. "The kids deserve it more than I do. Besides, what would I do with $120 million? Buy more cottages?" They'd spent weeks working with lawyers and accountants, establishing the foundation exactly as Marcus envisioned it. The Royal Heritage Foundation would provide scholarships for underprivileged children, fund historical preservation projects and support families in need, all the things his grandmother had quietly done on a smaller scale throughout her life. "Your fellow guards still can't believe you're giving most of it away," Elena said, settling beside him on the newly installed porch swing. Marcus chuckled, remembering yesterday's conversation at the palace. Davis and Mills had looked at him like he'd lost his mind when he'd explained his plans. But their mockery had long since transformed into something approaching respect, especially after the truth about Captain Thorne's corruption had come to light. "They'll understand someday," Marcus said. "Money changes people, but not always in good ways. I saw what it did to Thorne, to Vincent Chen, to everyone who knew about it. I won't let it poison me too." The sound of approaching vehicles interrupted his thoughts. A small convoy of black cars wound up the narrow country lane, followed by a news van. Marcus sighed. Even after 3 months, media interest in the Royal Guard's treasure story hadn't completely died down. "The mayor's early," Elena observed, checking her watch. Marcus straightened his tie, one of only 2 he owned, and prepared for the Foundation's official launch ceremony. Local officials, representatives from several children's charities, and a handful of carefully selected journalists would witness the signing of documents that would transform his grandmother's hidden legacy into something that could help thousands. The mayor emerged from the lead car, a portly man with an enthusiasm for cameras that bordered on theatrical. Behind him came Sarah Webb, the Foundation's newly appointed director, along with several other dignitaries Marcus was still learning to recognize. "Marcus!" the mayor boomed, ascending the porch steps with outstretched arms. "Today we make history!" As handshakes and pleasantries were exchanged, Marcus caught sight of a familiar figure hanging back near the garden gate. Chief Inspector Reynolds raised a hand in greeting, and Marcus excused himself to walk over. "Didn't think you'd miss this," Marcus said, genuinely pleased to see him. Reynolds smiled, his weathered face creasing. "Wouldn't dream of it. Besides, I have news. Vincent Chen was sentenced yesterday. 25 years, no parole for 15. Marcus nodded solemnly. Chen's attempt to claim the treasure through forged documents and violence had earned him charges ranging from conspiracy to attempted murder. His network of corrupt antiquities dealers had crumbled once Elena's investigation gained momentum, and the artifacts he was trying to smuggle returned to their countries of origin, just like you requested for the items we found here. Reynolds paused, studying Marcus's face. "No regrets?" Marcus glanced back at the cottage, remembering that night when he'd first pried up the loose floorboard, driven by nothing more than curiosity about a childhood memory. The medieval coins, the illuminated manuscripts, the priceless religious relics, all of it now resided in museums where scholars could study them and the public could appreciate their beauty. "None," he said firmly. "My grandmother always said, the best treasures are the ones you share." The ceremony proceeded smoothly. Documents were signed, photos were taken, and speeches were made about community service and preserving the past while building the future. Marcus found himself surprisingly comfortable in the spotlight, his natural sincerity resonating with the small crowd. As the last car disappeared down the lane and evening settled over the cottage, Marcus and Elena sat together on the porch swing, watching fireflies dance among the roses. "So what now?" she asked, her hand finding his. Marcus considered the question, feeling the weight of possibility rather than obligation for the first time in months. His resignation from the Royal Guard had been accepted with understanding, his service record unblemished despite everything. The foundation would provide purpose, but it wouldn't consume his entire life. "Now," he said, pulling Elena closer, "we figure out what comes next, together." The cottage settled around them with comfortable creaks and sighs, holding its secrets safely while promising new stories yet to unfold.